Hello, everyone, and welcome to Institute of Policy Studies Policy Lab's online webinar on Citizens Parliament Lessons in Public Participation. Speaking to us today are extraordinary Professor Nico Carpentier, Associate Professor Vaia Doudaki, both researchers in the field of communication and media studies at Charles University in Prague. Moderating the session today is our research fellow from IPS, Nicholas Thomas. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Wilson, and thanks everyone for joining us. We're very glad that you are here. We hope that we have a meaningful and learningful session this afternoon. This afternoon, we'll have three segments. I will share some context briefly, and thereafter our discussants, Professor Nico Carpentier and Associate Professor Vaia Doudaki, will present for about 40 minutes. Thereafter, we'll have hopefully an extensive Q&A. I ask that you hold your questions till the Q&A. We also hope to take a group photo at the end to remember this moment. Can we have the context setting slides? Thanks. Before we begin, we thought we'd just share some quick background on Policy Lab. It's one of the units within the Institute of Policy Studies. So Policy Lab is the newest research unit within the Institute of Policy Studies. We are set up as a policy innovation unit, moving IPS from a think tank to a think and do tank with implementation capability. Our work is applied and solutions focused. So we go beyond studying policy problems to also experiment and test solutions. You'll see most of our Policy Lab colleagues here. Why do we do what we do? We aim to find meaningful alternative solutions by constructively questioning the status quo. And we organize our work around three C's. First, to conduct policy experiments for impactful outcomes. Two, to convene the three Ps, the people, private, public sectors, many of whom are here this afternoon, alongside academic partners and other key stakeholders for collaborative knowledge creation. And third, to co-create ideas and tools that strengthen policy making in the Singapore context. Today's webinar is an example of our work in the second C. The second part, I just thought to share some context and just three more slides just to set the context before I hand over to Vaia and Nico. Singapore has come a long way in involving citizens on key issues, and we have experimented with new methods and approaches. The Institute of Policy Studies has helped pioneer the citizens' juries or panels in Singapore in partnership with agencies and partners, beginning with the Ministry of Health's War on Diabetes, led by then IPS head, Dr. Carol Soon. This was followed up by the Work-Life Harmony Citizens Panel, and more recently, the Employment Resilience Citizens Panel. The government too has run major national conversations, such as Singapore Women's Development, which had 160 conversations, and more recently, Forward Singapore. Beyond that, we have seen participatory design, for example, the Housing Development Board's Build a Playground program, and challenge-based approaches like the Youth Action Challenge, and more recently, the multi-stakeholder collaboration through the Alliances for Action on multiple issues. And yet, despite these efforts, social capital, especially bridging social capital, has been under strain in Singapore. In IPS's 2017 study on social capital, nearly half of respondents reported having no close friends outside their social class. And what emerged was that class, more than race or religion, emerged as Singapore's sharpest fault line in 2017. In 2023, the National Voluntary and Philanthropic Centre found voluntary participation rebounded post-COVID, but median volunteer hours fell from 24 hours to 9.4 hours, and this weakens the channels for bridging capital. More recently, in 2024, our Social Lab colleagues, led by Dr. Matthew Matthews, observed that the average number of close friends dropped from 10.7 to 6.5, with networks narrowing within socioeconomic groups. So as IPS Director Janadas Devans shared at Singapore Perspectives earlier this year, social capital isn't something we can bank once and draw forever. It requires constant replenishment. And so what is the opportunity? And that's why this opportunity with this particular piece with Nico and Vaia. In his National Day rally speech in August this year, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong warned that if social capital alluding to bridging capital, bridging ties, if it phrased society will fall apart. He called on Singaporeans to step forward, to take responsibility for one another, and to shape the future of our society. And so that's very much in the vein of what we hope the Citizen Parliament might inspire us or influence some of our thoughts and our ideas. I'm very, very excited to learn from Nico and Vaia, who have run a Citizens Parliament process. I had the chance to sit in on their presentation when they were in Singapore earlier this year for our conference. And there's much we can learn both from their outcomes, their own personal experience of it, and how elements of this approach might be adapted to the Singapore context. You would read Nico's and Vaia's extensive CV on the website, and shortly I'll hand over. So Nico is an extraordinary professor at Charles University and the former president of the International Association for Media and Communications Research. His work links discourse theory with media culture and democratic participation, including arts-based research and exhibitions. Vaia is an associate professor at Charles University in Prague, a director of the MA in Media and Area Studies, and co-chair of the IMCR's Communication, Social Justice and Democracy Working Group. Her work, rooted in social constructionist and post-structuralist approaches, examines representation and discourse in media, how identities and social phenomena are constructed. With that, let me hand over to Nico and Vaia, and we'll reconvene for a Q&A later. Nico, Vaia, thank you.
Thank you very much for, first of all, the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you. I'll take care of the first part of our intervention, so I think I should be polite and let Vaia also say hi to you.
Thank you, Nicholas, and the entire team for the invitation and the opportunity to share our reflections and experience and thoughts about how projects like a Citizen Parliament can work. And I'm looking forward to the discussion following our presentation.
Okay, thanks. As I said, I'll take care of the first part, which is a bit more, say, of a theoretical reflection on participation itself, because I think that having worked on the theme of participation, it's quite important to clarify what we mean when we use the concept of participation. And that's why I want to start with a bit of a broader reflection to prevent misunderstandings and misinterpretations. The good news is that I think that I'm in very good company. Quite a number of things that you guys have been doing is very closely related to our experiences, but also our theoretical background. So I think this will be during the Q&A, a discussion between experts, which is always something to look forward to. And I'm very happy that Nicholas and his team brought us together. So allow me to start and go for a screen share. I think you already know this part. So allow me to, again, as I said, start a bit broader to organize this reflection on what kind of interventions do we actually have at the participatory level when we discuss the Citizen Parliament, which is what Vaia will talk about. A very simple approach to democracy and its many variations. There's obviously not one democratic model. There's a multitude of approaches, but I think what binds all of them together is a very simple equation. It is the idea that there is always a balance, particular balance between participation and representation. Participation being the exercise of power by a political community, and representation means the delegation of that power to a particular group, a political elite, as it's sometimes called. So we will always find this kind of balance, but in so many different variations. And of course, and for those who know Athens, you will recognize the Pnyx, which was the cradle of Athenian democracy. And from the very beginning of the development of democratic models, we see that they're actually characterized by political struggle. But what is vital to keep in mind is that political struggle in the democratic context is actually a form to pacify that struggle, to remove violence from that problem-solving model. And that makes it quite important and quite unique. But we should keep in mind that this is David Held's work. We should keep in mind that there are many, many variations of how to organize that political struggle or how to organize that balance between participation and representation. And if we compare classical democracy, the Athenian model, with participatory democracy, we will find many, many variations. And as a footnote, I am, of course, perfectly aware that David Held's work on democracy is very Western-centered, and that if we would take a global perspective on democratic and participatory practices, this model would obviously look completely different. But that is just a footnote and maybe something for the discussion. If we zoom in on one of the two, not to talk too much about representation, but to talk about participation, there are two main approaches in, say, academic literature, but also in democratic practice, to participation. One of them is an approach that I don't use, which is a sociological approach. A sociological approach takes participation as a very broad notion. It is actually the shortcut defined as taking part. So in that definition of participation, you're actually all participating because you're taking part in this seminar. But I would argue that that is a too broad notion that conflates participation, interaction, engagement, empowerment, and all these concepts, and it puts it into one, which I don't think helps our reflection about participation. I use a more restrictive approach we call the political studies approach, which actually defines participation as co-decision making, as sharing power, not as taking part, but as sharing power. And that obviously gives a central role to the notion of power in these decision-making processes, but that also narrows down the meanings of participation, because then there is actually a difference between interaction and participation. And in that definition, in this seminar, you're not participating. It is actually the completely opposite of what a sociological approach would lead us to say. And to give you just one example, this is one of the golden oldies of democratic theory on participation. This is Carol Pateman's work from 1970, where she distinguishes between partial and full participation. But if you look at these definitions, you will see the very strong emphasis on influence and on power. Partial participation is having an influence. Full participation talks about equal power relationships. Now, I'm not going to unpack the notion of power, but just as a footnote, we use it from a more Foucauldian perspective, which actually defines power as a series of strategies. But that, again, would take us too far. So bear with me if I skip that part. If we take the same step back, when we talk about democracy, then we immediately have to acknowledge that democracy is characterized by pacified democratic political struggles. The same about participation. There are, in our different societies, many different ways to engage with participation, and there are actually political struggles over how intensive participation needs to be organized. Some would argue we don't need that much participation. Elections are enough. Let the people speak every 4 years and then let them be quiet, which are very, very minimalist versions of participation, while others would argue we need societal decision-making that is decentralized, that involves the people in many different societal fields, not only in institutionalized politics, but in the wide range of different parts of society, including the economy, including the family, including the educational system, including even the medical system, which is a fascinating discussion in its own right. At the same time, we should also be aware that the rhetorics of participation is not necessarily the same as the practice of participation. And there's where, and this comes from an article that Sherry Arenstein published in 1969. It's referring to the May revolts in Paris. It actually has, it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek conjugation of the verb to participate in French with a little modification. Je participe, tu participes, il participe, nous participons, vous participez et il profite, which translates as I participate, you participate, he participate. Please notice that there is no elle participe, she doesn't participate, obviously. Nous participons, we participate, you participate, plural, and then il profite, they take advantage of you. And I think that is one of the wonderful visual representations of the problems that in some cases participatory processes simply do not have that redistribution of power that for me is the definition of participation itself. We should also be aware that participation can be located in different places, in different fields. Sometimes participation in one field allows for, or activities in one field allows for participation in another. And that's why we distinguish between participation in a particular field and participation through a particular field. For instance, you can participate in the media, which would then actually allow you to participate in politics at the same time. And these are the kinds of displacements of participatory practices that actually we need to keep in mind, because if we're talking about citizen assemblies or citizen parliaments, we have the participation in the citizen assembly or parliament itself, but through that participation in that particular activity, people participate through their participation in the citizen assembly, they also participate in politics. So these are the kind of complicated relationships that we need to consider. Now, if we then zoom in on representative democracy and on institutionalized politics, we obviously see that parliamentary democracy centralizes the functioning of different powers, including, of course, the legislative power, but also the judicial and executive powers. Parliament is still seen as one of the key mechanisms of political participation, but we also have to acknowledge that that brings a series of reductions because the mechanism of elections has a number of limitations. It is actually reducing participation in time. Moreover, we need to be careful not to restrict participation only to institutionalized politics. And here we have, for instance, the work of Chantal Mouffe, a Belgian political philosopher, who distinguishes between the political and politics. In short, politics is institutionalized politics. It is the world of parliament, of government. But the political is a much broader sphere or dimension of actually how to handle conflict in all the different fields of the social that are connected to human relationships, and that where we can have societal conflict being played out and resolved in different ways, including in democratic ways. So we need to be aware that the logics of parliament and the logics of institutionalized politics is only one realm where we can talk about the political and where we can talk about the democratic. Nevertheless, then that's the second point, we can also find mechanisms to deepen, to enrich representative parliamentary democracy, which creates a number of tensions with elected representational systems, but which also allows to enrich them, to strengthen them. And there's a huge amount of methods to enrich parliamentary democracy. And the citizen assemblies or parliaments are one way to do that out of so many different options. And the citizen assembly or parliament is defined, and I'm using here the participedia.net definition, as a body of citizens who come together to deliberate on a given issue and provide a series of recommendations, options, or a collective decision on the convening body. And that is actually important to discriminate, because there are so many different political tools to enhance representative democracy. What a citizen assembly or parliament does is focus on a particular issue. It actually has a particular objective, that is to produce recommendations about that issue, and it does so through a participatory process, a form of collective decision-making. And that is what defines that notion of the citizen assembly or parliament. And then I should also explain in 3 words that the difference between citizen assemblies and citizen parliaments is definitely something to discuss. We prefer to use the name citizen parliaments because of the resonance that this concept has. But if you look at literature, then you actually do see a stronger preference for citizen assemblies. And this is, for us, this was actually a political strategic choice, not so much an academic choice. If we publish about the citizen parliament, if we write academic papers about it, we tend to say that it's a citizen assembly. But the citizen parliament that we organized was definitely labeled a citizen parliament. Sometimes another difference between the 2 concepts has to do with the size, where the parliament is considered to be a bigger group of citizens that are involved. But again, that is very much dependent on each of the individual practices, because you see quite a lot of variation in these tools. Now, if we take a very, very quick look at the OECD report that was published almost 2 decades ago on innovative citizen participation and new democratic institutions, then we actually see that enormous richness of tools. And these are only the tools that are used to involve citizens in particular policy issues that connect with institutionalized politics. Of course, there are so many other participatory methodologies that are not discussed here. And the first that comes to my mind, for instance, is participatory budgeting, which is yet another method, not even mentioned in this report, because they focus more on particular bodies of citizens that work with the field of institutionalized politics. But just to point to the list, citizens' assemblies is the first on the list, but you have citizens' juries, consensus conferences, planning cells, the G1000, citizen councils, citizen dialogues, and it just goes on and on and on. With, in some cases, and that's what you see to the right, the East Belgian model, Oost-Belgian, is one form of permanent participation, and same for the city observatory, which is another model that is not limited in time, but that actually has the idea of having a long lifespan. So again, I won't have the time to go into detail in the differences between all these different fields. In some cases, the differences are minimal. In other cases, the differences are theoretical. But just to give you an idea of the vastness of options that we have when we talk about citizen parliaments and forms of connecting citizenry to institutional politics. Now, if we zoom in on the citizen assemblies or parliaments, we actually see that they're quite linear. They actually have topic selection, recruitment, publicity stages, and then they actually have a citizen assembly phase, which is often focused on training, on discussion, deliberation, negotiation, and then a review phase and a final vote, a decision. One footnote that I want to add is that this linearity of the citizen parliaments, the way that it's often organized, actually has one setback, and that is that it is linear. Participatory processes often require you to go back. So when we were rethinking this model of citizen parliaments, we also got some inspiration from participatory action research, PAR, to at least bring a bit more of cyclical processes into the citizen parliaments and not to get stuck into this train of organizational decisions that would, in a way, limit the participatory nature of the citizen parliaments. And that concludes my part. That's sort of the frame in which we have been moving, and I'm happy to give the floor to Vaia. I'm also pleased that I managed to stay within the time that was allocated to me. Vaia will zoom in and talk more about the very particular experience, the work we did in organizing the Czech Citizen Parliament on media and democracy. And Vaia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nico. Shall I share my screen? Yes, okay. I think, oops. I managed even to find the right slide. So zooming into our study, our case study, our experience of organizing the citizen parliament. So the Czech Citizen Parliament on media democracy, it was part of a bigger European project. So we organized around the same time citizen parliaments on media and democracy in 4 other European countries, which impacted on some decisions related to basic design, but still each country adjusted in practice the citizen parliament in its country specificities. So very roughly, I will go through some main components of design and setup, and then have a reflection on the evaluation on how did it go and what we learned. So in one of the early stages, we set up an advisory council, inviting a series of societal actors from the broad field of civil society and media, given the topic of the theme of the parliament. So you can see here some examples. They ranged from organizations related to environmental issues, gender, religion, elderly people, but also related, as I've said, to media associations. So the role of this council was to help us spread the word for the relevance of the citizen parliament, but also spread the word as it concerns their members and their networks, to invite people to join the parliament, reflecting to a certain degree the diversity of the Czech society. We had a series of dissemination waves where we would spread the word, inviting people to join. So our call for participants actually that stays ran for a period even to, I'm thinking, 6 months or even more, seven months. So we have waves of paid advertising, social media campaigns, communication through the university we are based, but also through the advisory council, and actually that did work. So we ended up having quite a number of our participants through the networks of the advisory council. So I think that was a wise decision to make We had, as I said, a call for participants communicating about the main information rationale of the Citizen Parliament. Interested members were invited to fill out a survey because we were interested. I should take a step back and say one of the core decisions that we made with the entire consortium of the research project was to have a number of participants that was not too extended. So 20 participants per Citizen Parliament. And for that, still, we wanted to apply criteria of diversity. And the intake survey helped us identify and pre-select interested individuals on the basis of this criteria of diversity, of course, gender, age, but also regions in which these people come from or are based in the Czech Republic, but also ideological diversity.
So we were talking about an extensive promotion stage, which was followed by a recruitment stage, which we had different sub-stages. We launched call, which of course intersected with the promotion, but then when and this was actually important because it was a recruitment on voluntary basis. So we reached out to people. There was no representative sampling strategy that is sometimes used in citizen parliaments. So this was on a voluntary self-recruitment basis. But there was a very extensive selection process using an intake survey first, and then using intake interviews with the people that were pre-selected. The main objective of this process was to have a very, very extensive guarantee of diversity. Because one of the biggest problems of citizen parliaments is that you select your ideological friends, that you select the people that are very close to you intellectually and ideologically, which of course skews the entire process. But simply asking people, are you left-wing or right-wing, is insufficient because these answers might not be very helpful. So we used a very extensive survey, also taking into account different political ideological positions. And Vaia is getting back, so I'll give her 3 seconds to take a breath. And I'll just also say that when we were selecting the participants, we also put our own team together. And that was actually a very extensive group of people. You can see Vaia in one corner, and you can see me grinning in the middle, which is purely coincidental. But we also had 2 moderators, Miloš and Carolina, together with 2 observers that were actually monitoring the process. So we had a very extensive team. I should add that this was organized in the Czech Republic, where, as you undoubtedly know, people speak Czech. I should then add that both Vaia and I are not Czech, and we do not speak Czech, which tends to complicate things a bit. But that's also why we had different moderators that were obviously native Czech speakers, and observers that were native Czech speakers. And I think that I can, Vaia, if it's okay for you, I will keep the PowerPoint going and you'll just speak. So back to you.
Yes, the theme selection, the core theme MeDeMAP was part of the main European, the broader European project, and the 3 topics, the 3 thematic areas: media systems, media representation, media participation, and the relation to democracy was part of these core decisions. And thematically and theoretically, the content was instructed by Nico, Carpentier's and Jeffrey Wimmer's book, a theoretical framework on the democracy and media nexus from a discussed material approach. Still, within these 3 thematic areas, the parliamentarians could select their subtopics. So let's say more specific thematic areas underneath, within which they would still develop and formulate resolutions. We can move on. Nico already mentioned that for our citizen parliament, we had we used quite a wide spread and well-developed tools for citizens parliament, but still with a twist, as we have there. So to avoid the complete linearity, there were cycles of reflection that allowed for more, let's say, a cyclical process within the learning, listening, and deliberation, but going back and making adjustments throughout the process to allow the parliamentarians to engage in all the different stages, still in different intensities and variations, and we can discuss also about the limitations of our project later if there is time. I think, Nico, we can move on. So we developed as part of preparatory work, but even running work, we had a detailed script describing in detail all the stages, all the activities, who was involved and what we need. And you see here, for example, we reached version 12 after some tweaks, and you see here version 11. So you understand how this process well, even forced us to engage in a series of revisions and adjustments throughout the 3 months that the citizen parliament lasted. I think we can move on, Nico, and give some specific example later if there is time. So the citizen parliament involved a number of activities and decision-making instruments and procedures for the parliamentarians. One component that actually worked very well as consensus deliberation and formulation of ideas of subtopics and resolutions was the World Cafe rotate model or method, where actually citizens would work, the parliamentarians would work in smaller teams, deciding which subtopics were of relevance to them, and under these subtopics which resolutions were relevant under media systems, media representation, media and participation, as described earlier. And what is relevant, what is interesting in that model to allow parliamentarians to engage with everybody's ideas is that there was a rotation component. So actually parliamentarians would switch, would change. They would spend some time developing ideas in one table. We had 4 to 5 tables, depending on how many themes they had to discuss at its time, and they would rotate. So they would spend time, discuss, formulate ideas, debate, deliberate, and then they would move to the next table, and then to the next table, and then to the next table. Okay, one small limitation is that there was a table owner, as we would call it. So this person would still stay within to maintain consistency and being responsible to deliver at the end the output. But it worked really well, and there are different decision-making moments where people would vote. Actually, they I think we can move on to the next one. Nico and I can briefly describe how they decided to decide. What was interesting in the first meeting, in the first citizen parliament session, the parliamentarians themselves decided on how they want to manage the group when it comes to, let's say, the modus operandi, but also how they want to decide about the voting method. They decided to vote on the subtopics and resolutions with decided to vote on the resolutions on with enhanced majority, so 2/3 of the vote. So they actually opted for increased and, if possible, full consensus, which is, I think, is important. Still, even if the parliamentarians decided on the decision rules and the modes of engagement, one limitation was, and it relates to the limitations of the participatory component in our design, is that these people were not involved in the prior stages of the core theme, media and democracy. We decided, and the selection of the parliamentarians themselves. So these are limitations that I think we need to acknowledge. We can move on, Nico. There were learning components and instruments in relation to, for example, text, reading materials that were accessible for the parliamentarians to get access to, and videos introducing the core themes of media system, media representation, media and participation. They were available in a platform. We had an online platform where the parliamentarians would find all relevant material. We can move on. We see it here, we see them in action, deliberating at the tables and voting through voting cards. We see they holding them cards. So it was enhanced majority in public voting, which was interesting. So we see one card, Ano there, Ano means yes in Czech. I think we still have a bit of time, but the organizers, Nicholas or yeah. Somebody else should tell us how much time we still have left.
Yeah,
We had four sessions.
Maybe if I had 2 more minutes so that we got enough time for questions on the rest. Thanks.
You said 2 or 10? 2. Okay. So we had 4 sessions. We wanted to maintain criteria of diversity, as I already mentioned. So our sessions took place in different parts of the country to engage also with local experts. We had our experts, apart from the learning videos, experts in each session, unpacking the themes and bringing in examples of the Czech reality. We can move on. So the outcomes, there were 51 proposed resolutions, out of which 31 were accepted via qualified majority. And what is interesting, I know we don't have time to go in detail to the content, but what is interesting is that the parliamentarians had the opportunity, after they voted for the resolutions, to comment on them, both expressing confirmatory and dissenting opinions, which would give more space to both majority and minority positions, still respecting the decisions, right, what the parliament voted for.
So we ended up with 31 resolutions in a number of different themes like diversity, education, also local and community media support, strengthening journalism, funding for public media, and discussions about ethics and accountability. I think these were the areas where our parliamentarians made decisions. If we look back to conclude, if we look back at the process, I would never dare to argue that this went perfectly fine. For instance, our experts had the tendency of trying to dominate the setting, and we had quite some difficulty in creating spaces for citizens not to be too much influenced by particular agendas that experts had. There were wonderful issues when it comes to time, because our citizen parliamentarians wanted to have more and more and more time, while we were saying, like, we can't give you 20 years and you will still reach the same conclusion. So the time issue was absolutely crucial. Vaia talked about the script. It's great to have this rigid structure, but you also need flexibility, and finding the balance between this rigidity and this this kind of adjustability was quite hard for us. And then there are 2 more quick lessons we learned. Our citizens were actually extraordinary people, and I definitely don't want to problematize their skills. This was a really nice example of the activation of situated knowledge, where they could be quite unique in their own right. And the second point on the, say, nice part of our experience was that it also demonstrated how important diversity is and how it actually played a role. I was honestly surprised to see how these very, very different people managed to be very, very constructive. And that was one of my biggest surprises, because I was bracing for more conflicts and for more tensions. And I think that was, for me, a fascinating process. Finally, the biggest issue, though, is what comes after. And that is, I know, Nicholas, you were trying, but I was too quick. It's great to have resolutions. It's great to have a wonderful report. But now we need to talk to the political system and mediate between the parliament and that institutionalized political system that is not necessarily always that interested. We organized an event in the Czech Senate. We will have one in the European Parliament. But of course, there is no, in these kinds of voluntary setups, there's no way to force the political system to take this seriously. And it's part of a cultural political change process that we were very happy to instigate and to support. And I think these are my concluding words, Nicholas. So thank you guys for listening. I'm sorry for all the technical hiccups. Floor is yours.
No problem. Yes, thank you. If there's a reaction button, you can give them a round of applause. Please give them a round of applause. The floor really now is all of ours. And yes, okay, let's take the applause first. I wanted to just invite questions, and I thought we took 5 to 7 at a go. If you have a question, I just invite you to raise your hand, and then just come on. Keep it brief, and then we'll take 5 to 7 at a time. Maybe I just take the first few. Just introduce yourself and then the clocks. You need to unmute yourself. Santos, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm a citizen in Singapore, and thank you, Nico and Vaia, for such a wonderful presentation. My question is with regards to collective and intergenerational trauma healing. Yeah. Is there space for restoration and trust building between the state and the citizen based on the history of accumulated collective and intergenerational trauma around citizen participation, because this influences the agency of citizens. This influences the willingness of citizens to come forward to take part in the process of, let's say, deliberative democracy. And what I'm saying this is, I feel it's important to not just look at the mechanics of participatory democracy, but also the underlying culture and spirit of participation in society. So is there space, or do you incorporate healing modalities for healing collective and intergenerational trauma? Yeah, so that's my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Santosh. Sachin, go ahead.
Thank you, panelists. I have 2 questions. The first is, some participatory processes, they actually legitimize existing power structures, whereas others, they seek to find solutions by distributing power. Nico, you've introduced the issue of power in your presentation. So I'd like to find out from you, as a program designer, how can we ensure that power is more evenly distributed through our design? So that's my first question. My second question, which I hope the both of you would elaborate, is well, a challenge that I've always faced, which is how do we include minority voices within the process? Yeah, thank you, Nico.
Hi, Nicholas. I think I can go ahead. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte from Playum, and thank you so much for sharing. I love what the Policy Lab does. I think this is the kind of exciting work someone can wake up and jump out of bed every day. I just want to ask a question on children. Do you see children as contributing citizens? And I'm talking about children 6 to 12. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Maybe we take one or two more. If you feel shy to come on screen, type it in the chat. Or I'll put a +1, that also works. Okay, maybe we take the first three. You all have heard from Santosh about intergenerational and restoration, state society, switching at two questions, legitimacy through design versus distributive power, and how we might get minority voices, and then Charlotte's question around children 6 to 12. Nico, Vaia?
Yeah, maybe allow me to start. First of all, thanks for very diverse and very rich questions, making our lives difficult, which is always good. Maybe allow me to start on trauma. I think that if processes of healing, and both Vaia and I have been working extensively on latent conflicts. For instance, Cyprus has been our second home for these kinds of studies. And participatory mechanisms do work in the case of what we prefer conflict transformation, but also transitional justice. But at the same time, you need to be extremely careful, because if these participatory processes are set up in ways that actually ignore the pain of particular groups, then they will actually backfire. And that actually automatically brings me to the discussion on power, because there are many different ways of redistributing power. And participation is a process that is aimed at making those who are disprivileged, making them a bit more privileged. And people that are in the positions of victim, which is often where the trauma connects with all the complexities of the notion of victim, by the way. But if they are in the position of victim, they are usually in weaker societal positions. And then participation can empower them. But if it's done in the wrong way, it will completely destroy them. And that is where I would argue that a participatory process that doesn't redistribute power is simply not a participatory process. It becomes abuse and it becomes manipulation. And that's where we need to be very, very careful. And that brings me to the point about power, because of course, power is not something that is possessed, right? This is a typical Foucauldian position. It's something that is part of relationships, but it can be very unequal. And there are many different ways of intervening. When I was talking about participation in a field or through a field, that is something that I think we need to be aware of when we're organizing participatory processes. It's to make sure that the process itself is participatory, which means that you have to constantly analyze the positions, the power positions of all the actors. You have to permanently analyze the processes, what the outcomes, but also what goes into the process, right? The input of a process. All the different roles and identities play vital roles, but there's so many decisions taken in these participatory processes. You need to keep an eye and monitor all of them. They're micro decisions, what we call micro decisions, that can, in some cases, really skew the entire process back into a non-participatory process. So I've been actually writing about participatory modeling in an attempt to go beyond the ladder of participation, right? Arnstein's famous article, trying to communicate that you have to look at all the actors and all the micro decisions, and you need to try to balance all of them to reach more maximalist participatory contexts, knowing that there is no perfection possible in this. We are humans, and there will always be relapses. So I think that maybe I should give the floor to Vaia, to the really difficult questions about minorities and children, because we were playing with these ideas. In the Citizen Parliament, at least the minority issue got well, not perfectly resolved, but got handled. Children is maybe an even more difficult question. But Vaia.
Yes, thank you. A couple of reflections, and then I will go to, yes, minorities and children. I think no single parliament or assembly, no matter how participatory, will manage to solve, heal trauma, or solve core societal issues. We need long-term processes, so we should be modest about what we do and how much we can achieve. This is one thing. I think what is interesting, we didn't have time to address that. It relates to, as we call it, the paradox of tolerance, Popper's paradox of tolerance, in relation to we need to bring in these processes people who are willing to participate. And not sabotage the process, people who are willing to engage in constructive dialogue. So there are limitations, and this relates also to our, let's say, screening or the survey and the interviews that we were talking about. We wanted to find people that were willing to engage in constructive dialogue. If you have intolerant voices that you think that they will be destructive, then it might be better to decide not to include them. So not all participants are fit for all professional contexts. Maybe they still don't want to sound as if I would de facto disallow people to participate, but we should be aware of the context and the topic and what is at stake. Trauma healing is a very engages with so many sensitivities. So there, I think one needs to be extra careful in relation to who will bring on the table to discuss. But also this relates to minorities, for example. Yes, the Czech Republic is, I would say, rather homogeneous country that doesn't give that much visibility to minorities. Part of our design and pre-selection criteria was to bring as much as possible people that would relate to diverse groups, even if they might not consider themselves as minorities, but they were part of the different, let's say, multiplicities and diversities of the Czech society. And in that context, we had people sort of relating to these diverse groups or minorities. Some of them, I think, out of the 23 or 4 could be connected to, let's say, diversity or minority groups. It's not, what was interesting is, and this connects to the willingness to participate in dialogue and conversation, given that the Czech society is pretty homogeneous. And I would say the majority of people the ones that were invited and participated were willing to engage in dialogue. And everybody was surprised how people with so many different ideas and backgrounds could engage in constructive dialogue. They were surprised by what they did themselves. But there was some, I think, pre-selection, involved that did work. And what was interesting in relation to minority issues and not having them visible in, let's say, the Czech news or in the Czech public sphere, that was a space where people were more willing to discuss them. And because some of the participants put them on the table on equal ground. So we've seen it work, let's say, in a micro setting, but in that micro setting and carefully planned, it did work. And people were more open to discuss, spend time in discussing minority issues that they would not regularly discuss themselves outside this context, or we don't see them in the media. About children, yes, but I think one needs to be, again, a bit careful in planning. It depends on also, yes, I think both Nico and I see children as citizens with their own specificities. But of course, this is why I think it relates to maybe thematic relevance. If children want to participate, I think that would be, one component. And in what would children want to participate? Sometimes we bring them in these participatory settings, but we don't ask them, we don't engage them even in design or what they would be interested in. So they're not asked about their preferences. So we have the entire setup for them. So I would say in principle, yes, but with some careful planning and thinking what would be relevant also for children, not only for us adults to tick some boxes in relation to policy or research to collect data, right? Would it be relevant for children themselves to participate in that process? So I think that would be a starting point.
Thanks, Vaia. Thanks, Nico. I just wanted to do a quick round. Anybody else with a question you'd like to ask? Okay, if not, it's 5:08 in Singapore, and I thought we give them. Tyler, you had a question. What do you think were the conditions that made your practice? Anybody else? Maybe you do a last round of questions. And then after that, we can just wrap it up. I hope to take a photo. Everybody's leaving. We won't have a time to take a photo. Hopefully, you can get a photo. Yeah. Okay, so we have two questions. There are two questions. Maybe we take both. So, Tyler, if you could just share, just come on screen, just ask your question if it's possible.
think-
Same ideas.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I think I was just wondering what do the practitioners think were the conditions that was in their context that made the Citizens Parliament successful? Because we know that for something like this to be successful, there has to be maybe something in the people, something in the context. So I'm just curious, what do you think were the conditions that made the approach success?
Thanks. Yi and Lilian, if you could just quickly come on, and then I'll ask Nico and Vaia whether in like 3 minutes they could just submit it for us.
Yeah, thank you again for the presentation. So granted that each of us the participant come with our own agenda. So the question is, how do we, without shutting anybody off, how do we prevent or lessen the certain quarters from unnecessary hijacking the whole discussion? I'm referring to the problem of the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Thank you.
Thanks. And Liam? Okay, maybe Nico, Vaia, you have a question there as well. If you could just sum us up. Yeah, thanks.
Maybe one starting point is that any question about success is always very difficult to answer because it depends how you which criteria you use for success. For me, one of the elements of success was exactly the idea that the 20 citizens created a system where they started regulating themselves. And that actually is one of the ways to prevent two dominant voices taking over the entire parliaments. There were moments of self-correction, right, where the parliament itself started to argue like maybe we should be a bit more balanced, maybe we should be a bit more careful. And I think that is actually the best way to do it, is to make sure that you set up a model where the participants themselves are aware of how to manage their own process, because that's the participatory logics. And for me, seeing 20 people do that was probably the most successful part of the entire experience. So the design of a project like this is crucial. Participation is always organized. It's not something where you just tell people, please do something, please say something, and then expect them to everything to go perfectly. That's not how you organize participatory processes. They're very carefully planned, where also moderation designers are aware of their own role and are very careful not to influence, but at the same time facilitate and enable a participatory process to be participatory. So I think that for me is one of the most successful answers and lessons learned. But at the same time, if you measure success from the side, is there any political impact, then these methods are weak, because the political system is not forced to listen, and the status of these experiments are quite limited in that sense. So that would be my first set of answers. And Vaia.
Yes, very briefly, it relates also yet to success, but also how to avoid people hijacking and some of the other related questions. I think it relates also to what Nico said. What was interesting and what worked well for me, and I was also happy, is that the group decided how they want to manage themselves, which meant that they took responsibility of the session, of the protest, the process and the output, and they in cases, of course, there was tension, there was frustration, there was disagreement. Not everybody agreed with everybody. There was a continuous pressure of time. People were frustrated with how the resolutions, they were not completely happy with formulations, different views, all these things were there. But taking responsibility for the process, but also feeling that they serve a common good. And this enhanced also the responsibility towards, let's say, avoiding situation that somebody would hijack the discussion. So there were people that, we had our moderators, the two moderators that would intervene always in a kind and constructive way, but the group managed to, let's say, I don't know if I should call self-discipline, but to manage themselves pretty well. And that was really impressive to see, because there were 20 strangers at the beginning, and even from the first session, you would see them working together and having in mind, let's say, the greater good or the rules that they set up for themselves.